Okay, welcome everyone. Chodesh Tov, happy Rosh Chodesh. My name is Amy Greenberg. For those of you who do not know me, I have been asked by Shari Shemaim to give this month's Women Teaching Torah Rosh Chodesh lecture, and it is my pleasure to do so. By trade, I am a librarian at the University of Toronto. I live in the neighborhood of Shari Shemaim, and I very much enjoy all the davening and learning opportunities provided by the shul. So it's really great to be able to share some of that learning with you all tonight. And I would just like to dedicate this shiur to the memory of my beloved father, Avi Mori Mitchell Greenberg, Rafeli Yechiel Meir Shlomo Ben Chaim Tzvi. His yahrzeit is coming up later this month on the 11th of Tammuz. He was a consummate teacher. He was a lifelong learner, and he was definitely one of my inspirations for learning. So I feel that is very important. And Bershut, Imi Moroti, my mother, who is also in the audience today. Before I get started, I am just going to share a link in the chat, and that is the link to the source sheet that we will be using today. You don't have to click on it and follow along, but you certainly can, because the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. So you can either look at the source sheet on your own, you can look at the screen, you cannot look at all and just listen. I will make sure to repeat everything that I am showing you to ensure that nothing is missed. So welcome to The Heat is On, Navigating the Perils and Potentials of the Jewish Summer. Many of the ideas in this shiur were taken from a book that I have captured a picture of the cover of. It is this book. It is called, you can't see because of the weird blurry thing that Zoom is doing. It is called Seasons of Life by Natan Slifkin. And if you find what I say today interesting, then you may wish to read the book. And if not, then not. But anyways, that is the source that we are using today. So let's get started. First of all, so there are sort of three ideas in the title of my shiur, and we're going to go through all three of them. We're going to talk about what exactly we mean by summer, and the rest of the calendar for that matter. We're going to talk about what we mean by peril, and we're going to talk about what we mean by potential. So let's get started. What do we mean by summer? I know it seems like it's a self-evident question, but this is, the Jewish calendar, so nothing is that straightforward. Okay. Also, by the way, I'm a fan of audience participation, so I might sometimes prompt you for answers, and I promise they're not like hard questions. So if you'd like to pop your answer in the chat or unmute yourself, that would be great. Okay, so what do we mean by the summer? So the Jewish calendar, like the secular calendar, is divided into 12 months most of the time, except when it's 13 months, of course, and 4 quarters, which in the secular calendar we call seasons. In the Jewish calendar, they're actually called tkufot, and they are demarcated, as in the secular calendar, by 4 days: the equinox in the autumn and the spring, and the solstice in the winter and the summer. Does anybody know what the difference is between an equinox and a solstice? Anyone? Okay, maybe that's a hard question to start off. Okay, so equinox, as the name suggests, has the root equal, right? It means that it's a day when the hours of light and the hours of darkness are the same. So that happens twice a year, in the fall and in the spring. The solstices are the days where you have the most extreme difference between the length of day and the length of night, right? So in the winter, we have the longest night and the shortest day, and in the summer, we have the longest day and the shortest night. Keep that in mind. It's going to come up later. Okay, now, so we've got our 12 months, except when it's 13. We've got our 4 quarters. But when it comes to actual seasons, an interesting thing about the Jewish calendar is that we actually have, how many? Does anyone know? You can cheat and look at the source, the highlighted part of the source. How many seasons do we actually have in the Jewish calendar? Okay, tough crowd tonight. Okay, 6. We actually have 6. What is this based on? This is based on a verse in Parshat Noach in the book of Breshit, here for you as source number 1. And this is, sorry, I should explain the context of this verse is God talking to Noah after the flood and reassuring him that the world is going to continue on a regular cycle. So what does the verse say? Od kol yemei haaretz, as long as the earth endures, zera v'katzir, seed time and harvest time, v'kor v'chom, cold, translated by Natan Slifkin as late winter, chom, heat, translated also as late summer, kayitz v'choref, summer and winter. V'yom v'layla lo yishbotu, and day and night shall not cease. So you can see here in the highlighted area that there are actually 6 periods of the year. You will also note, just sorry, sidebar, but I cannot help myself. I have noted the source of the English translation for this verse also, because as we all know, anytime that you translate something, you are actually interpreting it, right? So every translation is an interpretation. So where possible, I've indicated the source of the translation, mostly from Sefaria, but Sefaria does get their sources from different places. So just something to keep in mind in general. Okay, so we have 6 seasons then, and given that we have most of the time 12 months, this means that every season gets 2 months. So in order, because the verse actually doesn't have them in order, it does them in kind of their opposite parallels, right? We start the year with Nisan, which is the springtime. So we have Katsir, or the harvest time, which is Nisan and Iyar. We have Kayitz, which is the summer, Sivan and Tammuz. We have Chom, which is heat or late summer, Av and Elul. We have Zera, or seed time, in Tishrei and Cheshvan. We have Choref, winter, Kislev and Tevet, and we have Kor, or cold, late winter, in Shvat and Adar. Now, all of this is a lot. So there is a summary diagram included in the source sheet, and I will walk you through it because there is a lot here, and we'll get to it in a second. You know, and I've made it sound like the sort of months and the seasons go together very nicely, but of course they don't. See above, read needing 13 months sometimes. So because in the Jewish year, we have to balance the annual solar cycle and the monthly lunar cycles of the months, right? We know things don't always, they don't always correspond quite so neatly. So often these seasons themselves will span across, you know, multiple months. The idea is that Pesach always needs to be in the spring, which, as we all know, can be, you know, can shift at different times during the year. Okay, so we've talked about the seasons. So let's talk little bit about where our the festivals and fast days fall in those seasons, and we'll talk about the significance of that in a moment. So this diagram, as I said, there's kind of a lot going on. I'll just quickly orient you, starting from the middle. So the middle wedges, the 4 wedges in the circle there, represent the 4 tkufot. We've got the horizontal lines. The one on the left is the spring equinox. The one on the right is the fall equinox. And the shorter vertical lines, the one on the top is the summer solstice. The one on the bottom is the winter solstice. Moving out in the circle, we have our 6 seasons, starting with spring harvest time with Nisan kind of on the top left of the circle, moving around to summer, fall, and then winter. And then the outer wedges on the circle are the 12 months. And then the dots on the line on the periphery of the circle represent the times during the year. So that's what we're going to focus on for a minute now. Okay, so if you look at this, you will see that, of course, as everyone knows, and we just mentioned, Pesach always falls in Nisan, which is in the spring. And then we have Sfirat Omer, and then we have Shavuot. So that's like a springtime progression. And even though you'll notice that the dot where Shavuot falls is actually technically part of the summer, the Torah never gives a date for Shavuot. So it's really very closely connected to Pesach in the spring, right? Pesach is kind of like the main festival, and then the Torah says count 7 weeks, and 7 weeks after that will be Shavuot. So it's all kind of a progression that starts in the spring. On the other side of the calendar, of course, in Tishrei, which is in the fall, we have our big 3 of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeret, 4, right? I'm not talking about Purim or Hanukkah today at this shir. That's a different shir, so I'm ignoring them. I'm sorry. Okay, so those are the major feasts and festivals, right? What about our fasts? Where do our fasts fall? Well, it's Tammuz. We all know that the 17th of Tammuz is coming up. And then, of course, 3 weeks later, we have the 9th of Av, so we have our summertime fasts. They're kind of on the top of the circle, a little bit off to the right. And then in the wintertime, again, ignoring Chanukah, but at the bottom of the circle, we have the 10th of Tevet, which is a sort of a solemn day and a fast day. So, okay, at this point, you're thinking, Amy, why are you taking all this time to go through the calendar and tell us when all the holidays are, which is something that we already know. Thank you very much. Okay. And also, like, what does it matter when they happen? They happen because that's when they happen, because, we left Egypt in the spring. So Pesach is in the spring. All of these tragedies that happened in the summer. So that's why our fast days are in the summer. And I will answer that is correct in one sense, but also there's, of course, a deeper meaning to it. So, the philosophy behind the deeper significance of the festivals, without going into detail and without reading this whole book by Natan Slifkin, can sort of be summarized very broadly in two different sources. So the first of those sources is source number 3 on the sheet, and that is the classic Rhomba Maimonides philosophy of getting to know God by studying the world. So let's read this together. How may one discover the way to love and fear him, meaning God? When man will reflect concerning these great works and the great and wonderful creations and creatures, and through looking at these things, he will understand the wisdom and knowledge of God, that has no equal, velocates and no end, miyad hu ohev, right away he is filled with love, and he praises and exalts, and becomes possessed of a great longing to know the great name. So Rambam, in his Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Yesodei Torah, which we just read, is basically saying that, the world and everything in the world, in the natural world, is a creation of God. And through studying God's creations, this is how we come to know and love God. And therefore, there's, no better way to spend our time than by studying the natural world, which includes the seasons and the phenomena that make up the seasons. So that's one point. Sort of building on that a little bit, we can go even a step further, and this is getting a bit more Kabbalistic or mystical, and it's really based on many ideas of the Maharal Miprag, Rabbi Yehuda Loev ben Betzalel of Prague, who authored many mystical works, and he wrote a book called Gvurot Hashem, where he goes into a lot of detail about the seasons and the holidays and their significance. And Natan Slifkin, in his book Seasons of Life, summarizes this in source number 4. The various spiritual energies in effect at different times of the year are directly manifest in the natural cycle of the world at that time. So what does that mean? Basically, what he's saying is that the natural cycles of the year reflect a deeper spiritual pattern, because everything in the world, everything physical in the world, is only a manifestation of a spiritual idea that existed before, that God, as it were, created and looked at and then manifested it physically, right? It's a very Kabbalistic kind of idea. And so through contemplating and studying these physical patterns, which reflect a spiritual pattern, we can not only grow close to God, per the Rambam above, but we can also develop our own spiritual energy and our own spiritual development, right? It's a pretty heavy idea. So, but with this basis, let's look again at the divisions of the year and where those festivals fall out. So I'm going back just to source number 2 and the somewhat busy diagram here. So we mentioned that if you look at the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 main festivals of the year, right? We said that we've got Pesach extending to Shavuot in the spring, right? And we've got Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot in the fall. The spring and the fall are our major festival times. What characterizes the spring and the fall, right? We talked about this. We talked about the fact that there's an equinox, there's equality. There's not really long days and really long nights. The days and the nights are about the same. Similarly, if we think about the temperature at that time of year, right? It's not hot, it's not cold, it's moderate, right? Moderation. However, in the summer and the winter, which is when the majority of our fast days fall, which are times of kind of national distress, they're during these extreme times of extremity, right? Extremity of temperature, very hot or very cold, and extremities of daytime and nighttime, very long days or very short days, right? And vice versa for the nights. So this would seem then to indicate, just based on where things happen in our cycle of the year, that Nisan and Tishrei, let's say, are favorable times for us, and the summer is not such a favorable time. And this is really a sign of another philosophy that's highlighted by the Rhomba, by Maimonides, about how the Torah prefers moderation in general. And I have cited that for you in the source sheet in source number 5. And it's a really long quote, and we're not going to read it all, and I'm not going to even explain it all, because I think the point comes across right from the very beginning. And the point is the following. And the Rambam here is talking about personality and character traits, but it's an idea that can be extended, as we'll see. And this is also from the Mishnah Torah, from a different part of the Mishnah Torah called Hilchot Deo. Okay, Haderech HaYashara Himeida Beinonit. So the Rambam says the straight path, the best path, is the mean, the medium, the middle, right? Shekol deya b'deya mikol hadiyot yesh lo adam, with every characteristic of a person. And so what does he mean by the straight path or the middle path? Hi hadeya shehi rechoka mishtei haksavot. It's the way that is the furthest from each extreme, right? You have one extreme on one side, one extreme on the other, the very middle, that's the way you want to go. And basically the rest of this section, he gives different examples, and he says, any characteristic that you can think of, it's always best to be in the middle. Don't spend too much money, don't be a miser, right? Don't get angry about every little thing, but don't never get angry. There are some things that are worth getting angry about. Don't be ridiculous and silly all the time, but don't be too serious all the time, right? With everything, there has to be a middle ground. So really, the Torah prefers this middle path. That's the way we go. That's the way we go. So as with character development, so it is in the natural world. Moderation is preferable. So that brings us to part 2, the peril of the summertime, okay? As Natan Slifkin says, extremes of environmental conditions are times of national hardship. So unfortunately, it's no surprise that this is reflected in our summer months of Tammuz and Av, right? It's a period of time that is not great. It worsens with the arrival of our fast of the 17th of Tammuz, continues, as we know, for 3 weeks, climaxes on the 9th of Av, or the 10th of Av, right? So let's remind ourselves, what happened, what do we commemorate historically on the 17th of Tammuz? These events are listed in the Mishnah in Masachet Ta'anit. The English translation here is from the Koren Steinsaltz edition, and I'll just explain for those of you following along visually. The words that you see that are in bold are direct translations of the words in the Mishnah. All the other words in between are, because the Mishnah is very terse, all the other words in between that are not bold are used by the translator by Rav Steinsaltz to kind of elaborate so we can understand better what the Mishnah is talking about. You'll see this in other translations as well. Okay, so Chamisha Dvarim Er'u ad Avotenu b'Shiv'a Asar b'Tammuz v'Chamisha b'Tisha b'Av. So the Mishnah goes on and says 5 calamitous matters occurred to our forefathers on the 17th of Tammuz, and 5 different disasters happened on the 9th of Av. I'm not going to talk so much about the 9th of Av now. I'm focusing on the 17th of Tammuz, but we'll mention that a little. I've only copied the beginning of the Mishnah though. B'Shiva Asar b'Tammuz. Okay, what happened on the 17th of Tammuz? Number 1, Nishtabru luchot. The luchot were broken. The tablets that Moshe got on Har Sinai, we all remember the story. Moshe comes down with the tablets. Meanwhile, the Jews are worshiping the golden calf. Moshe sees what happens. He breaks the tablets. Historically, we know this occurred on the 17th of Tammuz. Okay, number 1. Number 2, Batel HaTamid. The daily offering was nullified. This happened in the time of the Roman conquest. They they forbade the Jews from offering it, and not long after that, the temple was destroyed, so we never had the opportunity to offer it again. V'hufka ha'ir. The city of Jerusalem, the city walls of Jerusalem were breached. Okay. V'saraf apostemos et Torah. Apostomos, who was a Roman general, publicly burned a Torah scroll, v'ha'amid selim b'heichal, and he established an idol in the sanctuary. It's a little unclear, excuse me, who it was who put this idol there. Maybe they're talking about Apostomos. Some say they're referring to Menashe a little earlier in time, but there was an idol in the sanctuary. Not either way, it's not good. So if you look at this list of calamities, you'll see that we have, this is how I think of it anyway, you can feel free to disagree with me, but we have two that are related to idol worship, right? We have the breaking of the tablets, which came about as a result of the Jews worshiping the golden calf, and we have the idol in the sanctuary, right? And we also have two that are related to fire. We'll talk more about fire later, right? We've got the nullification of the offering, which offerings require fire, and of course we have the burning of the Torah scroll. Burning happens a lot, right? We hear a lot about burning at this time of year. When you think about the 3 weeks, you think about the temples going up in flames, which happens on Tisha B'Av. But right, there's like a lot of fire. There's a lot of heat that we're talking about when it comes to this. Now, interestingly, the word that we use for destruction when we talk about the temples is generally, anyone? It's not a hard question. I promise it's not supposed to be a tricky question. What's the word?
Harav or harvu?
Harav. Excellent. Sorry, I cannot see who said that, but yes, harav, korban, right? Korban. And you are one step ahead of me, because the root of korban, chet resh bet, right, is charev, and charev also means dried up, especially when we talk about land. We talk about something physical. And Natan Slifkin, in his book, he mentions the fact that this word charev, this root, can express sort of simultaneous spiritual and physical desolation. So there's a verse from Tehillim that he brings in Psalms. The psalmist is talking to God, and he's saying, day and night your hand lay heavy on me, right? Something bad is going on. When God's hand lays heavy on you, it's not good, right? My vigor or my freshness was changed or withdrew, it waned in the drought of the summer, right? Charvone, there's that word, like korban, like charev. So here we have a verse that encapsulates the psalmist feeling like God's hand is heavy. There's like spiritual desolation, and it's related to the dryness of the summer, the drought of the summertime. So let's take a step back for a second. In Israel, in the summer, in addition to the warm temperatures, obviously, but what else causes the heat and the dryness? What isn't there in the summertime in Israel? Not here. Rain, right? Rain, no rain. Now rain has huge spiritual significance, right? Everywhere in the Torah. I didn't even bring a source for it, because like, who could pick one? Everywhere in the Torah, when there's rain, it's a sign of a connection between God and the Jewish people. When there isn't rain, it's a sign of punishment. It's a sign that something is lacking. And rain, we can see that in the physical manifestation of rain, right? Rain comes from the heavens and it goes to the earth. It's a very physical manifestation of this relationship. So no relationship with God, lack of rain, right? And in fact, the Masechet that we just looked at above, talking about the fast days, really most of that Masechet, it's Mishnah Ta'anit, by the way. Ta'anit is another word for a fast day. And most of that Masechet talks about fasting that is instituted by the leadership of the Jewish people during times of drought. So because that's what we do, right? When there's no rain, when there's no connection, it means that we have to reestablish that connection to God. So we need extra prayers. We need extra fast days to try to focus our attention on the spiritual. Now, in our case, we're talking about summertime. Summertime is a natural time when there's no rain. So it's not like a direct punishment from God, but it still means that there is, during this time, perhaps it means that our relationship with God is a little more distant than it needs to be. There's isolation. A lack of rain also represents isolation, right? The land and the heaven are isolated. There's nothing connecting them because there's no rain coming down. And the soil, dries up. There's a lack of cohesiveness even in the physical earth, right? Everything is dry and cracked in the summertime. Earlier, I highlighted the fact that a couple of the things we commemorate that happened on the 17th of Tammuz are linked to idolatry. And we know that worshiping idols is one of the cardinal sins that caused the destruction of the temples. But, so let's investigate this a little bit, because like on the one hand, you could think, well, idolatry is like, I don't know, is it really so bad? So, okay, instead of worshiping God, you're worshiping one of God's agents. You're worshiping like a lesser power. But isn't it just kind of like misdirected worshiping? And in a way, that's true. But in another way, there's more to it than that, right? When you focus on an intermediary instead of God, and worse, by picking and choosing which intermediary you want to worship, what you're doing is choosing a power that you think can satisfy your own need, right? You are being selfish. The deity that you choose because it can serve you, not so that you can serve the deity. It's the exact opposite of monotheism and our obligation to God. So in a way, the root of idolatry is actual selfishness, selfish desire. We separate from God because we want to focus on our own needs. And that is the represented by the verse I quoted on the sheet in source 8, taken from Proverbs or Mishlei, very pithy, as you would expect something from Proverbs to be. L'ta'ava yivakesh nifrad. He who isolates himself pursues his desires. Simple as that. You want to go off and do your own thing, it means you have to separate. And not only from God, right? From other people too. If you want to be part of a community, you can't always get what you want. You're going to have to negotiate. You're going to have to compromise. You're going to have to put other people first with any relationship. You can't always focus on what you want. If you want to do only your own thing, only fulfill your own desires, you have to isolate and take a step back from other people. If everybody does this at a communal level, right, it leads to breakdown. It could even lead to murder and baseless hatred, which were two of the other cardinal sins that caused the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Everything because of isolation, because of personal and selfish desires. And desire, as we know, if you read any poem or listen to any pop song, and by pop song, I mean really anything from the last, I don't know, like 100 years, right? What's the typical metaphor for when you desire something, right? Flame, especially romantic desire, right? Like love, a flame, burning passion, fire, and flames. According to some people, even the word Tammuz, the name for our month, represents an idol that was worshipped by fire. And therefore, part of the punishment or purification that we needed during this time involved fire, right? The Beit HaMikdash had to be burned. The Torah scroll was burned. I would even argue, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that we no longer have the ability to bring offerings, korbanot, which need fire, right? It's sort of like we isolate ourselves from God and we're punished by not being able to further make that connection with God because we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. We can't bring our offerings. By the way, offerings is not a bad translation of korbanot. It's I think a word that's a little hard to translate, but what's the root of korban? It's karov, right? Kuf reish beit. Through these offerings, we're supposed to come close to God. But if we choose to isolate ourselves from God and be selfish and pursue our own desires, guess what? We're punished by not being able. God takes away that medium that we used to use to bring ourselves closer. Anyway, that was just kind of a sidebar. So things are not looking so good. I had to throw in a meme here just for fun. Perhaps you have seen this. It's the cartoon dog surrounded by flames saying, "This is fine." Yeah, things are not looking so good for us at this time of year. But my friends, don't worry, because nothing in this world is all bad. And that brings us to part 3, the potential of the summertime, right? The challenge of Tammuz, says Rabbi Slifkin, is to use its heat and fire for good. So let's learn together. Time is ticking away. So I am not going to go through this all. I copied here for you, source 9, most of a page of Gemara that is super interesting. I mean, we could spend like an hour on this Gemara alone, and I'm sorry that we have to just kind of rush through it. But here we go. This is an amazing Gemara from Masechet Yoma 69b. Follow along in the source sheet or just listen to my hopefully not too incoherent summary of what's going on. Okay, the Gemara tells a story. It is trying to explicate a verse from the book of Nehemiah that says, "Vayitz'aku el Hashem Elokim b'kol gadol." that they, the Bnei Israel, the Jews, cried out to God, Lord their God, with a loud voice. So now the Gemara goes into a discussion of what were they saying? What were they crying about? By the way, the book of Nehemiah is one of the later books in the Tanakh, not one that's well studied, by myself included. I can't say that I'm very familiar with it, but it occurs in that time period after or in between the times of the two temples. So the first temple has already been destroyed and the Jews are back in Israel and they are rebuilding the second temple. Okay, so the Jews are crying. What are they crying about? Says the Gemara. They are crying about the evil inclination for idol worship, the Yetzer Hara, and specifically the Yetzer Hara that drives people to worship idols. They're saying, whoa, this evil inclination was terrible. Because of it destroyed our temple. It burned the sanctuary. Righteous ones were murdered. It caused the Jewish people to be exiled, and it still exists among us. And the people say to God, did you give us this desire, just so that we could be rewarded for overcoming it? You know what? Forget it. We don't want it. We don't want the reward. Take it away from us, right? We don't care. Take it away. So they prayed and they fasted, moving down. And guess what? God answered their prayer and he delivered this evil inclination to them. What did it look like? Oh my gosh, this is so interesting. What did it look like? A fiery lion cub came out from where? Mibeit Kadshei HaKodashim, from the chamber of the Holy of Holies. And the prophet, according to the English translation here, it's Zechariah, said to the Jewish people, look, here you go. Here's the evil inclination for idol worship. It looks like a fiery lion cub. And by the way, it lives in the Holy of Holies. Wow. Again, we could talk about this for like half an hour, but we have to skip. Okay. So the people were like, great. I am skipping over this next little bit. But by the way, I think this is so interesting. So basically the next paragraph is the people have a debate. What should we do with this fiery lion cub, this evil inclination? Obviously, we want to get rid of it. And they're like, we have to be careful because we don't want heaven to have mercy upon this evil inclination because it's crying. They hurt it and it was crying. Total side point, but I think this is very interesting. If you think that if you ever feel like you are not worthy of mercy from heaven, okay, remember that heaven has mercy on the evil inclination for idol worship. So heaven will have mercy on you too. Total side point, but I think it's an important one. Anyway, okay, what do we do with this fiery lion cub? They sealed it up in a container of lead and threw it down into the ground somewhere. Okay, bye-bye. No more evil inclination for idol worship. We are done. So then they said, hey, okay, that worked out pretty well. You know what? It's an 8 ratzon. It's a time of an auspicious time. Let's also pray that the desire for sinning in the area of sexual relationships, that one's pretty bad too. Let's pray to God that we can get rid of that one. So they prayed, and sure enough, God delivered it into their hands. And then the prophet said to them, you have to understand that if you successfully destroy this other Yetzer Hara for sexual relationships that are improper, the world will be destroyed. So the people were like, oh, okay. So instead of killing it, they imprisoned it for 3 days. And during those 3 days, people searched for a fresh egg throughout all of Eretz Israel and could not find one. Whew, this Gemara, amazing. Basically, what's the point? The point is that people, we not only have to struggle against our desires, but we need our desires. The world cannot exist without their desires. Take a look at source number 10. It says it right there. Breshit Rabbah 9:7. Rav Nachman bar Shmuel bar Nachman b'shem Rav Shmuel bar Nachman Amar. It's a lot of Nachmans. Okay, Rav Nachman, I think probably I copied that wrong. Rav Nachman said in Rav Shmuel's name, okay, it's talking about the creation of the world, right? We know that during the creation of the world, God calls a lot of things good. So they take a verse and they say, when God is saying something's good, it's referring to the Yetzer Tov, our desire for good. But when God calls something very good, Tov Me'od, what does this refer to? The evil desire. So the desire for good is good, but the desire for evil is very good. Yetzer Hara, Tov Me'od. Can the evil desire be very good? Yeah. Ilulei Yetzer Hara, lo bana adam bayit, v'lo nasa isha, v'lo holi, v'lo nasa v'natan. Yes, actually it is. because without the evil desire, no one would do anything. No one would build a house. No one would get married. No one would have children. No one would engage in business. We would all be sitting on our couches, staring into nothing. Passion is a necessity. It drives us to accomplish not only good things, but everything, things we need for life. We can't kill, whatever that means, right? Going back to that Gemara, we can't kill the Yetzer Hara. We need it, and it needs to be harnessed in the right way. And the way to harness it, of course, is for good things, is for Torah. And Torah itself is compared to fire. Fire isn't just a bad thing, an agent of destruction. It's good. It can be good, right? The verse in Dvarim, when it's talking about giving the Torah in a poetic way, it says, Hashem Sinai ba, Hashem came from Sinai. Mimino eish dat lamo, from his right hand went forth a fiery law. The Torah is called a fiery law. And so is learning. So is Torah learning. Last source, number 12. Amar Rabba Bar Chana. Rabbi Bar Chana said, Lamanim shalu divrei Torah ka'esh. Why are matters of Torah compared to fire? As it says, there's a verse in Yirmiyahu and Jeremiah. Hello, kol dvari ka'esh ne'um Hashem. Behold, is not my word like fire, says the Lord. Ma'esh ino dolek yechidi. Fire cannot ignite from just like one stick of wood, right? You can, or a match by itself. A match by itself will not light a fire, right? Af divrei Torah ein mitkayimin b'yachidi. So too, words of Torah are not retained by someone individually. So just like you need to rub two things together, at least two things together, to make a fire, in the same way, a person studying by themselves cannot retain Torah. You need a study partner. You need multiple study partners. You need a group. You need a teacher. You need to be together. And remember, we talked earlier about one of the roots of the sins of this time being isolation. So here, my friends, here is the remedy, okay? We have to not only use our passion for good, but we have to turn to each other, and we have to learn together, and we have to help each other. And that is the way we can fight against the isolation and the selfishness that can be imposed upon us by this season and this time of Tammuz. So really, I'm going to just finish up. I have some silly bonus content on the bottom. That was just something I did when I was feeling a bit silly, but the serious part of this year is over. And I just want to say that I hope you learned something. I hope you found this a little bit inspirational, and I hope that you can use this to help make this a time of Torah growth and learning and inspired passion, and passion directed in the right way for us and for everyone. Thank you. And I am very happy to stick around and take questions or comments in the chat, or just by unmuting yourself.
Thank you, Amy. That was super interesting.
Oh, my pleasure. You are welcome.
It was great. Sorry, it was great. You gave me a lot to think about. A lot to think about.
Thank you. Rabbi Slifkin, Seasons of Life. Keeps getting blurry, but anyway. I am happy to loan it, and I just thought it was a really interesting idea, so I wanted to share with you all.
Why do you think it's called Yetzer Hara if it does good things?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, right? Like, why isn't it just a Yetzer? Like, why?
Like activity.
Yeah. Why is there even this sort of differentiation between a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara? It is very interesting. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I'm happy to hear what anyone else might think about that. I don't know if the Yetzer Tov is more like, I don't know, sort of like you have to kind of, it's almost like conquering your sort of natural desire, maybe to be selfish, and it means that you have like this extra push to do something good, whereas the Yetzer Hara is maybe like just a more natural kind of Yetzer. I don't know.
Like it's the Yetzer Bria. It's like productivity.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Contemplate by philosophers who know more than I do. Sorry, Rena, I lost you there for a second.
No, it's a more compelling idea when it's Ra. Like we recognize it, like it's not just productive, it's also like there's also bad in it. If you do too much of it, it'll take you to bad places.
Right. Maybe it's just a way of like realizing that we can't take it all like you can take it so far, but you can't just let it kind of go on its own like natural path, because that does not lead anywhere good. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a really interesting show.
Thanks, Marina. Thanks for coming. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Amy.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Have a great night.